What I want to do in this video is look at how to draw a science fiction environment. This is where we take a character and place them in an awesome, epic science fiction location and look at kind of how we deal with all the problems that creates from a drawing perspective. Now, this is part of a series on backgrounds on the Drawing Codex channel, and I'm going to combine a couple of the concepts that I have previously covered. Mostly we're going to look at how we frame a character with background elements, and I've done a really simple video on this, but we're going to take this to the next level here and look at how we actually use complicated city environments to do the same thing. Frame the character with the background in a really simple manner. This is also building on the idea of creating a series of set pieces, thinking of yourself as a director where you have an environment, you have a city, something you've designed, and there's a variety of different elements there, and your job is to figure out how to place them and keep the iconic representation of where you are working. We're going to talk about how to take a background that you might see if you're just looking at an establishing shot. How do we make sure that we feel like we're still in that same city or place when we're on the ground, just looking at characters day to day? Anyway, this should be a fun one. Let's jump in and get started. Alright, welcome to the Drawing Codex. My name is Mcburnie. I've been a professional working artist for over 20 years, and on this channel, we're all about drawing cool stuff from our imagination, embracing the challenge of drawing, and mastering the craft of line and color illustration. Now, if you'd like to learn more about illustration and picture making, you can check out my free illustration mini workshop. It charts my journey going from an amateur to a professional, and I talk a lot about really important issues such as how to get more detail and polish in your work, how to plan your images, create thumbnails, and also a few thoughts on how to approach being a professional artist. As I said, it's free. The link will be in the description. Go check it out if that's something you're interested in. All right, let's look at how to draw a science fiction city with some characters from the ground. Now, I'm going to roll in a few concepts from previous background videos on the Drawing Codex channel, so if you haven't seen those yet, then I really suggest checking them out. Mostly, we're going to talk about this idea of how to simply frame your character with the background. In the demo where I did this, I was just using abstract forest. What I'm going to do in this one is use the science fiction environment. And I have also talked about how I create these environments when we're looking from above, thinking about how we sort of plan them from afar, right? So when you're thinking about these sort of larger backgrounds, and we're really just looking at them as background. And what that means is, hey, there's not necessarily a story. We're just drawing random background, right? So we're just filling up the frame with stuff. And that is about thinking about foreground, midground, background. What's our focus? So again, a little bit of a complicated brief here, but I'm just going to do something really simple, which is look at how we might block in some frames and shots, looking at maybe some different characters and scenarios and kind of how I actually apply a lot of the stuff that I have been talking about in previous videos to an actual shot in an actual science fiction city. Again, we're just going to be dealing with thumbnails and rough things so that we get the idea flowing, but that's the goal for this video. In previous videos, I've talked about how if we look at iconic shapes, we can often just combine very simple iconic ideas to create a feeling of complexity. Now, the goal is here to say, okay, but how do we then take this and draw characters from the character point of view looking up at something? So that really is the fundamental question here that I want to address. How do we think about iconography and use it both when we're looking really close at something and really far away? And I think, again, the idea of iconography is super important. So what we have basically, if we think about the design phase of this, is what our zoomed out icons are. So if I'm looking at this from afar and I kind of say, hey, you know, I've got some of these big shapes, where I've got my clamshell shape, my ovoid shape here. I also have this idea of the squiggle S curve that kind of defines the edges of some of these forms. You can see it there really nicely displayed. And what else do we have? We have these giant towers, right? So giant big towers that kind of grip the ground. I also have the idea that some of these shapes can be kind of attached with almost these physical embodiments of like a sail or something. So a good example of that, you can see some of this stuff here where, again, we have these suspended primary forms and they are kind of joined in strange architectural ways to the ground. Again, why? It just kind of looks cool. Again, has this retro-futuristic vibe. I think one of either the previous video or the next video will be one where I talk about and really unpack the design here. So again, you can reference that as well to look at how I sort of came to a lot of these ideas. The other thing we obviously have is this idea of foliage, right? So areas of foliage. Now, these are all the sort of zoomed out. These are the iconographic elements that we have when we are zoomed out, when you're looking afar. So if you think about, just from a very basic perspective, if you think about this from New York City, right? What you have, if you look at, the zoomed out version of New York City, is we just have these big skyscrapers, right? It's just giant skyscrapers everywhere. And that's kind of what we're looking at. Now, is that actually what you see? No, it depends exactly where you are. But if you look at, a Spider-Man game or Spider-Man comic or something like that, often this is what you're dealing with, is these, again, some of them have that kind of Art Deco 20s look. But basically you're seeing these skyscrapers come out of the ground, and there's a variety of them, right? But that's what we're looking at, these just city blocks of skyscrapers. Now, the question is, okay, when we're looking up, right, this is zoomed out. What do we see when we're on the ground? Well, you're going to see, right, sort of cars. You're going to see people. There's going to be a lot of stuff on the ground that we kind of identify as, right, paraphernalia, right? You got fire hydrants. Again, depends what fire hydrants look like in your little city. There's post boxes, right, light poles, etc. There might be wires in the sky. You're going to have all of these different things on the ground, and what you're going to see in the background is the zoomed up shot. So if we look at, again, our sort of New York City shot, again, just being pictographic here, not trying to draw anything sort of realistic, but right, again, you might have a really basic shot here, right? And what have I got? I've got a whole bunch of skyscrapers, right? A city block. Again, I've never really been to New York, so I don't really know what it looks like, right? But again, if we were to think about it iconically, right? Got some cars. More cars on the ground. Right, cars here. Right, there's people on the sidewalk, etc. So what we're looking for is like our street level iconography and our zoomed out sort of background iconography. And again, this is super iconic, but it's just drawing fast so that we kind of get the idea, right? And again, people, we're going to have light poles, right? Depending on what city you're from, these things will all look different, right? Boom, etc., 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 etc. And this really is the dichotomy that we're trying to create. So what are the sort of surface level things that we might look at when I'm looking at creating... where would this be? Probably be like this. So I have, or the other thing that we have here is this feeling of the giant canopy, right? The canopy surrounding the science fiction environment. So if we look at the bottom here, just sort of fill this one out so we can get a vague feeling of it. Yeah, I think we'll go that way. Again, these are the shapes we're looking for. These ones, we might have, again, a tower here and there. Whatever it is. And again, got a bit of extra space here. Have a little ship flying. Again, that might be one of the iconic elements that we kind of have. Again, the point here is we have our zoomed out version of this. Again, my instincts are to try and make this drawing look a little bit better. All right, try and add a little bit more detail, try and figure out how we can improve the composition. Add a bit more stuff. Try to get a good foreground, middle ground, background going. Again, utilize those ideas. Oh, it's looking pretty rough right now, but you get the idea. Now, if we look at that from the ground, what we have to come up with is a series of ideas and visual iconic shapes that work for the ground as well. Now, one of the things I kind of talk about when I'm discussing the design here is that we don't really know what the technology level is going to be. So if you look at sort of New York City, the important thing to understand is that there's a lot of utility to these functional items on the ground. We have cars, right? Do we have cars here, or is everything in a spaceship? You have lights. Do we need lights here? Is there some other solution for sort of lighting stuff as, you know, different to just having these kind of street lights everywhere? And then you think about the utility of the items that you would see on the ground, such as fire hydrants, post boxes, wires, street signs, etc. And I sort of mentioned that I'm trying not to do too much stuff with this environment that is going to potentially lead us down a direction from a design perspective. So, for instance, I said that you don't want to have any retail stores necessarily. Why? Because, well, look, we're in the kind of the future here in 2023 currently as I'm recording this, and a lot of people are buying stuff online. So it leads to reason that maybe in the future everything's going to be airdropped to you from drones, right? We are potentially building here a Star Atlas video game that this comic Star Atlas Core is a prequel to, where people are going to be putting on VR glasses to play a video game. And it makes sense that, hey, you might sort of put on your VR glasses or press a button and you're in a virtual shop. You can sort of look at all the things you want to buy, and then you press buy, and then again they just sort of instantly airdrop to you. That seems like a more reasonable way that you would sort of project retail to work in the future. Who knows? Or we might want to just, make it comfortable and sort of have this pretend thing. Again, not everything in Star Wars or Star Trek makes any sense whatsoever. A lot of it is a matter of letting the viewer have fun and, explore the ideas of what living in the future might be like. We don't always have to go hard sci-fi with it. But it is super important to understand that these are the questions we need to ask, right? Are there going to be a fire hydrant, in this environment? Why? Why would there be a fire hydrant, right? This is very specific to the way that water is used for putting out fires. It might be different. Again, it might be a million nano drones, shooting some kind of foam at it. Who knows, right? Very, very tricky to figure out. So what I'm trying to do, again, that's a lot of talking, to really get at the fact that what I'm trying to look for are solutions visually that are safe from a design perspective and get across the overall idea without going too far. So I've kind of kept it at these it almost looks like what sort of an architectural rendering of a futuristic environment would be. often when you see architectural visualizations of what a little kind of city or area that they're creating, often they'll kind of do this where they're creating like public spaces, and they have these cool renderings, but they don't show all the boring stuff like the manholes and the all the little bits and pieces that actually make it look far less fancy. So here we're kind of getting rid of functionality, and that's very much a design decision. So what do we end up with, right? The things that I kind of zoom into are, if we look at another little example, what I kind of end up with is like, okay, we have these sort of public areas for display, and what I imagine is in this futuristic environment, we're going to want a lot of greenery. Now, greenery is not growing in the ground. It has to grow in these kind of planter beds because there is no ground, right? They're not on a planet, they're on this space station. So I have planter boxes, and you see this in, again, modern architectural environments. Dirt is placed in, places on sort of mounds of concrete. So I've got this idea, and then I also have the idea of large public displays that are meant to display information / advertising. Who knows? Although, again, whether or not there would be advertising in the future, hard to say. Again, depends what your overall idea is for how a particular future is going to function. But this is what I sort of ended up with, is these basic structures and a lot of public sort of facilities, right? Seats. So if we look at that sort of basic idea here, I'm going to have a variety of different shapes with the same idea. So the same stuff, but happening in different areas. So if we look at from above, all right, what I might have is, again, a circular flower bed, essentially. All right, and in that flower bed would be a cacophony of different interesting alien plants, most of the time which I'm iconically representing as just this squiggle. But if we wanted to, again, we could put some interesting alien plants there, make it look really weird. And then in a couple of them, I kind of had this idea of saying, okay, well, let's have these little screens, and maybe the screens are telling us about the plant, right? So you have a little display, all right, sort of showing you what you're looking at. Again, or other stuff. Again, will there be any displays in the future? Who knows? Could all be sort of retinal projection. Very hard to know. But again, what we're trying to do is imagine a fantasy, because even though we don't need horses now, some people still like to ride horses. There's a romance to it. And a lot of these things that we do don't necessarily make sense. But again, what I'm thinking of are lots of public spaces here, right? So someone could be standing here, and someone else could be sitting here, let's say. And same thing here, right? We could have people standing, or we could have people sitting. And again, I'm just drawing a little blocky architectural concept design man who gets to adventure all over the known universe and past. But this is the basic idea. This is really the singular iconic unit that I've got. The other one that we have that's a little bit more visible is the idea of these monorails or other kind of transport scenarios. And that's really what I've used to fill up most of the ground. So there you can see basically, okay, we're looking up. So when we look up, I'm still seeing those same iconic elements that I would normally see. Right, except now what I've got are, right, a few of these different foreground, right, smaller items to block in on the ground. Now what this does, and also I'm linking some of the visual iconography here with this. So we still have the idea of foliage combined with these, who knows what this is made out of, right? But these human designed shapes. Canopy, ship flying in the background, another good iconic element to say, hey, we're in space. And again, there's asteroids behind here. So very, very simple iconography. And again, what I'm going to have is a series of people walking around these environments. So apologies again, I'm kind of drawing things over things, but you get the idea. So that's the basic equation, let's say, is I'm taking the zoomed out things, I'm making sure I still draw them in the background, and then what I need is a series of ground level objects that are designed, that match the background, that I can just fill it with. It's very specific to this particular comic that I have things that I'm really trying not to do and things that I'm trying to do in terms of just show and display. As I said, we don't know how the water is distributed. We don't know how retail is created. We don't know whether there's signage or whether there wouldn't be signage. But the key here is we do want the greenery. We want public spaces. We want the feeling that this environment is created for people to hang out in, that it is created for people to come together, have a sense of community, communal space, that, again, this world is for everyone. And, it's not just little sort of pockets or some dystopian future where everyone's stuck in a little sardine can. The idea is the future is going to be great. You're going to be walking around in an awesome space station with planets and asteroids and ships flying by as, you enjoy your custom designed flower bed with a cacophony of different colors and shapes and environments. I could probably push those flowers and things a little bit more, try to make that more interesting in my shots, but brevity is also a consideration. So that's the basic thing. What we'll do now is, again, just do a few examples where what I'm going to do is take this idea from the frame your character with a simple background idea, and I'm just going to use it with this visual language and just show you how these things mix together. So there's a couple of considerations I think that are really worth just thinking through before you start this, because so much of what you draw is defined by the story and what the focus is. So firstly, I think it's good to think about what the story is. What is the focus, right, in the frame? What are we looking at? And the second thing to think about is well, what is the frame? Now, if you're just doing concept art for film, you're often working in this standard filmic landscape view, similar to video games, right? Your job is really design stuff that looks good here. In comics, we kind of can have whatever kind of little panel we want, and we don't often get to choose it. In a similar fashion, if you're doing a lot of cover work for old school magazines or things like that, again, we've often got, I do these for the comic. We've got a title, right? We've got some stuff down the bottom, and you kind of got this space in here. So, right, what is the frame, and how do we fill it with different stuff that looks interesting, right? Again, this is all part of the story that we tell. There really is no right or wrong answer to any of this. It's just about being specific, right? So tree, what shape is the frame? All right, so let's look at, again, just a standard, we're looking from the ground frame. What I'm going to do is focus on, yes, we're on the ground, but what we're actually looking at is the background. So we draw a frame, and again, I'm just going with a standard widescreen frame, right? I use quite a few of these typically. And again, this is a good example of what we're looking at here. In this instance, the story is really just about showing the environment, but from the ground. So in this case, what I'm going to do is show, look, there might be a few characters here that I'm thinking about, but what I'm really trying to design is looking at this environment from down here. So I'm going to think about what is in the midground first, but what I'm going to try and do is push the depth, right? So when we're thinking about the frame, and we're trying to sort of show this environment, I'm going to push depth and whatever feeling that I sort of need, right? Which is normally going to be like sort of epic. Right? Epic sci-fi city. So again, this depends what you want to tell, but in this case, that's the idea. So I'm going to try and show the depth here. I'm going to put one of these big iconic clamshell shapes here, and I'm going to put another one here that's slightly smaller. What I'm thinking about is, okay, how can I frame and put in some of these very simple foreground elements, right? So in terms of perspective, I'm thinking horizon line is pretty low. The more you understand about perspective, the easier this will be. And I've kind of got right, I want this to feel cinematic, so I've got the right simple sort of vanishing point here that I'm going to kind of use to just frame things up. None of this is really considered from a perspective point right now, but again, this gives us a bit of an idea for where things, right, probably should converge. So again, probably down here though. All right, so I'm thinking about, okay, I've got one of these, right, boxes here, and what I'm going to try and do is show, again, depth. I'm pushing. Let's create less of a weird tangent there. So I'm pushing the idea here. Putting one of those there. Pushing the idea of depth, right? So again, having this shape repeating. Right? Shows depth. Having one of these big things here. Put some, again, trees on top of it. Should make those trees even smaller, because that will make it feel as if that thing is huge. All right, so we got that, and again, might have a few on the other side over there. Again, in the background, let's sharpen this pencil so we can get to some of those. In the background, got a few more of these things, but I'm basically going to create different size versions of these large shapes. And again, this one can create some of those wings. That one's behind. And we'll think about this stuff as being foreground, and over here I'm going to have a similar thing, right, but smaller. Right, so if you think about, okay, there's a character over here, maybe there's a character here in the foreground. Again, I'm doing this by eye, but there's a lot of perspective in my brain, right, that is thinking about how big these characters are. Now, this is something that's so important to understand, and what I'm always saying when I teach perspective is that, yes, doing very, very boring perspective constructions is kind of unartistic, but the more you understand perspective, the more I'm able to kind of sit here and do these silly little sketches and, make them kind of not necessarily work, right? If I was to do a proper perspective overlay on this, I'd redraw a lot of this. This is really just planning the basic idea. But what you find is the more you study fundamental perspective, the real, like in detail from an architectural level of complexity, the easier it is to just kind of do little sketches. So again, I'm going to use a few other tricks here, but basically I'm going to do the same thing that I was before, which is like, let's kind of have a character here. They're experiencing the background. This is not really about them, but they are sort of seeing this thing. So again, what I'm going to do is point to that character with the big arc of one of these city things. Skyscraper thingies. That's what I mean. When I say city, I mean skyscraper. Right, so we got these big swooping things. So that's kind of coming down there, and these lines are sort of pointing there. I also have some, again, freedom and leeway to kind of think about, putting more of these clamshell things around the place. They have an organic way that they are positioned. And again, linking them up, if we sort of think about informal composition, which is, where we kind of just look at like the lines that are going to tend to be created by the eye, we can see that again, I can join things up, I can create space here and there, and that will kind of frame, block the eye from kind of disappearing to some weird spot. But yeah, I'm thinking about sort of eye flow kind of pointing here, right, obviously. So this is very simple, very sort of brutal composition. And again, we might have another one of these shapes or something like that. Again, just sort of filling the space and, right, making it clear what's going on. Now, this is where, again, I'll tend to fiddle around with it, right? If I'm doing this not for a demo, I'll sit there and I'll raise this thing and I'm like, do we need that, right? Maybe I don't need that. Maybe it reads just fine like this, right? Maybe we want a bit of extra space there. Maybe I want to put a balloon there, right? Maybe we want to put a dialogue box there saying, right, blah, blah, blah. So-and-so observed the city and its grandeur was immense, or whatever. You would never put that. So again, just trying to think about what would be there. Trying to frame these things. Again, might be good to put a bit of stuff there. Now, if we think about this from a tonal perspective, probably these are showing up really strongly, but they would be quite faint in the background, and we would emphasize this line here that's really pointing there. And then we got these, right, making up the canopy. Boom, 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 boom. So there, hopefully that gives you a rough idea of kind of what I'm talking about, right? We just fill the frame, and I'm really thinking about this exact same idea. So in this video, I was talking about, hey, just frame your character with the background. It's exactly the same thing I'm doing here, except just a little bit less pictographic, and I've actually got something there. Now, is this the best background design? Probably not, right? I mean, there's probably things that could be better about it. Normally when I'm doing this, I'm gauging my intuition. I'm thinking about like, oh, maybe this feels a little bit empty, right? Maybe I want like a character here, right? Sort of that way I can sort of anchor this. So there's often bits you can add or take away to create a different feeling. Totally fine, right? We could have a guy or girl or alien or thing sitting on the bench here. All of these things would add life to it. Again, you could have your kind of ships flying around, whatever you want, right? You can add elements. So this is where what I'm saying is like, what are the elements that I have that I can create composition and tweak things with? So, for instance, I've often talked about the fact that, there might be sort of ships flying here, right? So I could literally have like a ship, coming around here, and maybe it's sort of flying in there to land or something like that. And again, that's going to point at my character, right? If you're lacking and you're really missing something, the other thing is, if I go to, there's a bit of empty space here. Well, let's put an asteroid back here. I'm creating some good dynamic sort of overlap that's going to create that depth there, right? So these would be asteroids in the background behind the canopy. Anything I can add, or if you think it's working, just don't add that stuff, right? Again, less is more. Lastly, let's look at, again, how we would do exactly the same thing, but framing a character or some kind of action. So here you can see are a few good examples that are going to be very similar to what I'm doing here. And this one will just be a short little sketch to give you an idea. But again, you can see the idea here. I have a character and I've just put some background there, but this really is about the character. And, we'll probably see that depending on which shot you're taking, right? Again, there's some background in there, but, it's not as vital. So in this case, oh, that's a bit wobbly. In this case, it's really just a matter of starting with the character and the action. So So we need kind of an idea. Right, let's just have a character leaning up against some of these basic iconic shapes, right? Move this guy. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to fill the frame properly. Right? So we got some of these basic concepts, right? Okay, let's have someone leaning up against one of these. So in this instance, I'm just going to block it in from a conceptual point of view first, so you can kind of get an idea for where I'm going. Apologies, this is a little bit faint. All right, so they're leaning up against one of these kind of beds of flowers and stuff like that. All right, I'm thinking about perspective again. We got a lowish horizon line. All right, going off there. Again, there would probably be a vanishing point somewhere over here as well. Okay. So the main element I have that I need from a story or sort of narrative point of view, right, is character leaning. And again, they're going to be talking, let's say. Character leaning and talking. So if we think about how we frame that up, boom, boom. Again, I've got this idea that there's going to be seats here that again someone can be sitting on, and I can tell that story here that like someone is sitting here, and maybe it could be, again, it could be part of our story. It could be just a character sitting there doing nothing. Maybe they could have a cat with them or something like that. Like when we have these kind of Tigu cats that are cats in the Star Atlas world. Maybe we could have someone sitting there with a cat, right? Again, I don't know whether there are like futuristic birds or things that would be sitting around there. Again, that's probably a question for another day. But again, here what I'm going to do is just think about, okay, we got a character, right? One leg is kind of on the ground. I've got one leg sitting up on this bench, right? Going back to the basic idea, hopefully you're kind of following along, right? Torso is here. Head is up here, and again, let's make this this Moda character, who is my kind of one of the aliens here, just for iconicness. All right, so they're just kind of sitting here posing. Right, what are they saying? Who knows? Who knows? Right, again, this could be the secondary Geon character, could be someone in the background, who knows? Doesn't really matter. I mean, it does matter from a story point of view, but not from me just doing a little sort of demo point of view. And again, you know, we'd just plus the drawing and make this better. Right, again, have this kind of head, tentacles, right, frame out where all that stuff is going. Again, add more character bits and pieces. And, you know, then this is where, you know, look, this is a thumbnail, so the feet are probably not going to land exactly where they need to land. But we get the rough idea. We would need to do another pass on this to really figure everything out. Or it might be, again, you know, just tweak where the leg is. Who knows? All right, so this is where, again, it sort of gets interesting. I have most of my fundamental things blocked in. I am in fantasy comic book world. I can warp reality to my needs. So what I need to think about is, where do I place these little screens here? And what else do I put in the frame? So probably, if I think about, okay, this is how high a character is over here, right? If there was a character standing there, this is kind of how high they would be, maybe something like that. Maybe a little bit, right? A little bit shorter. Right, if there's a character standing over here, they'd be this high. So this just gives me, again, just a rough idea of where people are. Now, what I'm going to try and do is just point stuff at the character. I'm going to think about where these big display screens are going to be. And Again, you know, they might actually be a little bit bigger than that. Make them a bit bigger. And again, think about where there is one on the other side. Now, all I can say is like, oh, well, maybe let's not have one on that side. Maybe we'll just have one here. And then what I'm going to do is create this foliage, right, that is sitting in this box. But I'm going to create it specifically so that it overlaps where I need. So I'm going to get good tangents overflowing his head tentacles, creating some interesting negative shapes. And again, you know, making sure that it flows around all of these different elements. Right, and this is where, again, thinking about your composition, your backgrounds is so critical. We're building things from a sequence around the main character. The background here is framing the character. Exactly the same concept that I'm talking about here. It's just this is more complicated, and I have different things to work with. But that's the story. So what do I want over here? Well, again, I'm just going to put one of these big arcing clamshell shapes here, because that feels like that would work. I'm going to put a smaller one over here. We can see that we probably look like, let's have maybe in the background we'll have another one of these little things. It's really good to replicate the shapes, right, to make it clear what's going on. And what I might do again is maybe put a few characters, right, sort of walking in the distance here. Well, again, easier said than done. And again, we'd probably have a few in the background there. So this really kind of fills out that frame. Now over here, right, we are looking like we're kind of pointing this way, right? Everything's pointing this way. We basically have this design where everything is pointing off the page, and this is not good, right? So I have a big shape here, but I'm really sort of struggling to kind of stop the eye going off there. So you could either stop, redo the thumbnail, figure out something else, or really, again, you know, consider like what else we could create to kind of help and block that shape. So again, what are the other tools I have? Again, I have this tool here, which I'm going to use again. And again, it could be that we create that in front of this big shape, or we could just have that shape there and then again just put one of these behind it. Who knows? Again, think about some additional shapes here. Boom. And then again, everything is just about making sure that we reinforce where we want the eye to look, right? And make sure that we push the contrast here. So if I know that this is my primary read, again, you know, I kind of might have secondary read as like maybe this character, this stuff here, and then tertiary read is like sort of this stuff in the background. Again, a big part of as I progress through this image is to really think about how I get the focus here and, you know, stop things moving off in this direction. But you can see that just by kind of, you know, putting in this movement here that I've got some directionality in the composition going this way now. And whenever you have some situation, again, where you have a giant arrow pointing off the screen, off the panel, which is a big problem, just what you got to do is just have that in the back of your mind as you create the rest of the image, and just try and constantly rebalance things. Right, and again, maybe he's got a bag over here next to there, maybe something else that they're kind of sitting on there. Again, who knows what those will, that'll be future Tim's problem to figure out what that stuff is. But this is generally how I will kind of think about composing one of these shots. And the reason that, again, you know, if you haven't checked out this video where I talk about, you know, framing your character with a simple background, the reason I really explain it in a simple way like this is that's exactly what I'm doing here. It's just that instead of forest, where I can basically make it any shape that I want, what I have to do is select from the iconic elements that I have and say, okay, what can I put here? I've got the main point of the story. I need to fill it with background. What do I have here? Okay, I've got these public spaces. I got these shapes, right? How do I, get that stuff and, put it in here? But all I'm thinking about is framing the character. Okay, I've got a character here talking, right? And they might be saying like, man, we got to get out of this city, right? I'm sick of this place. Whatever it is. The rest of the panel is just about showing that, just filling it up. And depending on how complicated the background needs to be, again, you can see sometimes I've got these things here. Sometimes it's just very simple. Sometimes it's very elaborate. Sometimes I've got nothing, right? It's all a matter of, what your illustration needs, how complex is it. Again, you can see here, the main reason for this is to, show that they're moving fast, right? So I've got the background really kind of moving in the same direction as them. Again, we're pointing exactly the same way, but because from left to right English reading, right, we're reading from here to here, it kind of shows us that speed, and we don't have that problem of going off the page. So much of this is specific to eye movement. Where's the eye going? How do you frame things? And how do you just make sure we tell the story? We've got a character leaning, they're talking, they're in a science fiction environment. That's all the end. Anyway, hopefully this one was interesting. Let me know in the comments whether this enlightened you to how I would go about drawing one of these backgrounds. Let me know whether this idea helps. A lot of people have requested this kind of demo, saying like, yeah, but how do you draw it from the ground? And again, it's easy for me to say, hey, look, it's just exactly the same thing that I've been talking about, but I do appreciate that it is useful to kind of show it. So anything else like this where I've said in the past in other videos, like, hey, I'm going to do this in a science fiction city, or this is the same as this. If you just want me to show that, like I've done here, then just, yell out in the comments, right? How about this? How about that? I do appreciate that. It's really important to see it put into practice. But honestly, mostly what I'm doing is just, exactly following the kind of simple plans that I'm talking about here. Again, there's 10, 20, 30 different ways you could illustrate this scene. You can either fiddle around with this one. You might need to start it a whole bunch of times. Your perspective might be really off. Who knows? There would be another pass where you could true that up. Key thing here is to figure out what goes where and, to block in the frame, make sure that we are telling our basic story. So anyway, let me know if this one helped. Other than that, we'll catch you around. Happy drawing.